Question 1. What factors determine the appropriate data masking strategy for sensitive information within a distributed system, considering the need to balance business stakeholder requirements for data utility with adherence to U.S. federal data privacy and security regulations? Option A. The complexity of the data masking algorithms and the availability of advanced masking features, regardless of their impact on data utility or regulatory compliance. Option B. The cost of implementing data masking solutions and the preference of the IT department for specific vendor technologies. Option C. The speed at which data masking can be performed and the perceived urgency of business stakeholders to access the data for testing purposes. Option D. The specific requirements of U.S. federal data privacy and security regulation, the sensitivity of the data being masked, the intended use of the masked data by business stakeholders, and the technical capabilities of the chosen data masking tools. Correct answer is D. The specific requirements of U.S. federal data privacy and security regulations, the sensitivity of the data being masked, the intended use of the masked data by business stakeholders, and the technical capabilities of the chosen data masking tools. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of business stakeholders for data access and usability with the long-term regulatory and compliance obligations related to data privacy and security. The core tension lies in the potential for data masking or anonymization techniques, while preserving data utility for testing and development, to inadvertently expose sensitive information if not implemented correctly. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen approach aligns with the specific regulatory framework governing data handling within the organization's jurisdiction, which for this exam is assumed to be U.S. federal regulations pertaining to data privacy and security, such as those influenced by HIPAA and SOX, where applicable to financial or health data. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory requirements and the business context before selecting and implementing data masking strategies. This involves engaging with all relevant stakeholders, including legal, compliance, and business units, to define acceptable levels of data utility and risk. By adhering to established data governance policies and employing robust, auditable masking techniques, the organization ensures compliance with regulations that mandate the protection of sensitive data while still enabling necessary business functions. This proactive and collaborative approach minimizes the risk of regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and data breaches. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical feasibility of masking without considering the regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, implementing a masking technique that is easily reversible or does not adequately obscure personally identifiable information, PI, would violate regulations requiring data protection. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence regarding legal and compliance mandates, leading to potential fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach might be to overmask data to the point where it becomes unusable for its intended purpose, such as testing critical business applications. While seemingly cautious, this approach fails to meet business needs and can lead to inefficient processes and workarounds that may introduce their own security risks. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the balance required between security and utility, and a failure to engage with business stakeholders to define appropriate masking levels. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory requirements. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of the data to be masked, understanding its sensitivity and intended use. Next, a collaborative process involving legal, compliance, and business stakeholders is crucial to define the objectives of data masking and the acceptable trade-offs between data utility and risk. Finally, the selection and implementation of masking techniques should be guided by established data governance policies, with a strong emphasis on testing, validation, and ongoing monitoring to ensure continued compliance and effectiveness. Question 2. When evaluating the use of production data for testing and development environments with IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems, which approach best ensures compliance with data privacy regulations and maintains the integrity of test data? Option A. Implement robust data masking and anonymization techniques tailored to the sensitivity of data elements, ensuring that re-identification is prevented while preserving data utility for testing. Option B. Apply superficial masking to a limited set of fields, believing that this minimal effort satisfies regulatory obligations without impacting data usability. Option C. Copy production data directly into test environments without any modifications, assuming that the limited access to these environments negates privacy concerns. Option D. Remove all potentially sensitive data fields entirely from the test datasets, even if it renders the data unsuitable for realistic testing scenarios. The correct answer is A. Implement robust data masking and anonymization techniques tailored to the sensitivity of data elements, ensuring that re-identification is prevented while preserving data utility for testing. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in data management, balancing the need for data privacy and regulatory compliance with the operational requirements of testing and development. Organizations using IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems must ensure that sensitive data is adequately protected, especially when it's being used in non-production environments. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing appropriate masking or anonymization techniques that satisfy regulatory mandates without rendering the test data unusable. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the specific data elements, their sensitivity levels, and the applicable regulatory framework. By employing robust data masking techniques that align with the principles of data protection and privacy, such as those mandated by relevant U.S. regulations, assuming U.S. jurisdiction for this exam context, as no other is specified, and C 2090-552 is typically associated with U.S.-centric IBM product training. An organization can effectively mitigate risks. This approach ensures that sensitive information is transformed or removed in a way that prevents re-identification while still allowing for meaningful testing. This aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations like HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, for health data, or GLBA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act for financial data, which requires safeguarding personally identifiable information, PI, and protected health information, FI. An incorrect approach of simply copying production data to test environments without any masking or anonymization is a direct violation of data privacy regulations. This exposes sensitive information to unauthorized access and potential misuse, leading to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, such as using superficial masking that is easily reversible or doesn't adequately obscure the data's true nature, also fails to meet regulatory requirements. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in protecting sensitive data and can still result in breaches of privacy. A third incorrect approach, which might involve overmasking or removing essential data fields, renders the test environment ineffective, hindering development and quality assurance efforts, and indirectly impacting the ability to deliver compliant production systems. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach. This involves identifying sensitive data, understanding the regulatory requirements applicable to that data, and then selecting and implementing appropriate data protection strategies using tools like IBM InfoSphere Optim. This process should involve collaboration between data governance, legal, compliance, and IT teams to ensure a comprehensive and effective solution. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that the test environment for a critical financial application is being populated with production data that contains sensitive customer information. The development team requires realistic data for performance testing, but the current practice of using raw production data poses a significant compliance risk under U.S. financial regulations. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for realistic test data with regulatory compliance and data privacy requirements? Option A. Generate entirely synthetic data that mimics the structure and volume of production data, but contains no actual customer information. Option B. Delete all columns identified as containing sensitive customer information from the test environment's data. Option C. Populate the test environment with a statistically representative sample of production data, without any modifications to the sensitive fields. Option D. Implement robust data masking techniques using IBM InfoSphere Optim to transform sensitive fields into realistic but non-identifiable data, ensuring data utility for testing while protecting customer privacy. Correct answer is D. Implement robust data masking techniques using IBM InfoSphere Optim to transform sensitive fields into realistic but non-identifiable data, ensuring data utility for testing while protecting customer privacy. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in data management, balancing the need for data utility with regulatory compliance and data privacy. Specifically, the question probes the understanding of data masking and anonymization techniques within the context of IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems, V7, 3, 1, and its adherence to relevant U.S. regulatory frameworks governing data privacy and protection. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate method to protect sensitive data while still allowing for effective testing and development without compromising regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves utilizing Optim's robust data masking capabilities to create realistic, yet non-identifiable, test data. This aligns with best professional practices because it directly addresses the requirement to protect personally identifiable information, PI, and other sensitive data as mandated by regulations such as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, for healthcare data, and the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, for financial data, both of which are highly relevant in a U.S. context where IBM InfoSphere Optim is commonly deployed. Optim's masking functions are designed to transform data in a way that preserves its structural integrity and statistical properties, making it suitable for testing without exposing actual sensitive information. This proactive approach to data protection is a cornerstone of responsible data governance. An incorrect approach, such as simply deleting sensitive data fields, is professionally unacceptable because it renders the test data largely unusable for realistic application testing. This failure to provide adequate test data can lead to production issues and negatively impact the quality of the application, indirectly violating the spirit of data integrity and operational efficiency expected by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach, like using a subset of production data without any masking, represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes data privacy laws by exposing PII and sensitive information, leading to potential data breaches, significant fines, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of data protection requirements and a lack of due diligence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the data's sensitivity, the intended use of the test data, and the applicable regulatory landscape. A framework would include 1. Data classification. Identify and classify all sensitive data elements. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the risks associated with exposing this data in a non-production environment. 3. Regulatory review. Determine all relevant U.S. data privacy regulations, e.g., HIPAA, GLBA, CCPA if applicable. 4. Solution selection. Choose appropriate data transformation techniques, masking, anonymization, generation, offered by tools like Optim that meet both testing needs and compliance requirements. 5. Validation. Verify that the transformed data is both fit for purpose and adequately protected. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that the development team requires access to realistic customer data for performance testing of a new application module. The current practice involves developers directly accessing a copy of the production database. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure both testing effectiveness and regulatory compliance regarding sensitive customer information? Option A. Provide developers with read-only access to the production database for testing purposes. Option B. Implement IBM InfoSphere Optim's data masking capabilities to create anonymized and de-identified data sets for the development environment. Option C. Restrict testing to only synthetic data that does not resemble any actual customer data. Option D. Continue using direct access to a copy of the production database, relying solely on existing network and database access controls. The correct answer is B. Implement IBM InfoSphere Optim's data masking capabilities to create anonymized and de-identified data sets for the development environment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing data privacy requirements with the need for effective data management and testing. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that sensitive customer information is adequately protected, while still allowing development and testing teams to work with realistic data sets. The regulatory framework for this exam, C2090-552 IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems V7, 3, 1. Implicitly emphasizes compliance with data protection principles, even if specific jurisdictional regulations are not explicitly detailed for this exam context. The goal is to achieve a state where data is both usable and secure. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the need for data masking and anonymization as a fundamental control for protecting sensitive information. By employing IBM InfoSphere Optim's capabilities for data masking, organizations can create realistic yet non-identifiable data sets for testing and development. This aligns with the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that data is only used for its intended purpose and that unnecessary exposure of sensitive information is prevented. This proactive measure is crucial for maintaining customer trust and avoiding potential regulatory penalties associated with data breaches or misuse. An incorrect approach that involves using production data directly for testing without any form of anonymization or masking fails to adhere to fundamental data protection principles. This exposes sensitive customer information to unauthorized access or accidental disclosure, creating a significant regulatory and ethical risk. Such a practice would likely violate data privacy regulations that mandate the protection of personal identifiable information, PI. Another incorrect approach, which is to completely avoid using any production-like data for testing, hinders the effectiveness of the testing process. While it prioritizes security, it compromises the ability to identify and resolve issues that are specific to real-world data volumes, distributions, and complexities. This can lead to the deployment of software with undetected defects, impacting business operations, and potentially leading to customer dissatisfaction, which indirectly has compliance implications if service levels are not met due to system failures. A further incorrect approach, such as relying solely on access controls to protect production data used in testing, is insufficient. Access controls are a necessary layer of security, but are not a substitute for data transformation techniques like masking. Even with strict access controls, the risk of accidental exposure, insider threats, or sophisticated breaches remains. Therefore, relying only on access controls for sensitive data in a testing environment is a critical failure in a comprehensive data protection strategy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based assessment. This means identifying sensitive data elements, understanding the potential impact of their exposure, and then selecting appropriate controls. IBM InfoSphere Optim provides a suite of tools that enable a layered security approach, including data masking, archiving, and subsetting, which can be combined to meet specific compliance and operational needs. Professionals should prioritize solutions that demonstrably reduce the risk of data exposure while enabling necessary business functions. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the current data masking techniques applied to production data copied for testing environments may not be sufficiently robust to prevent potential re-identification of individuals, even after anonymization. The organization needs to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations while maintaining the utility of test data. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Continue using the current data masking process, assuming that anonymized data is inherently protected and poses no significant re-identification risk. Option B. Rely on the IT department's assurance that the existing masking process is adequate without independent verification or further analysis. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the data masking strategy, including an assessment of its effectiveness against re-identification risks, and implement enhancements if necessary, while also evaluating the impact on test data usability. Option D. Implement a more aggressive data masking technique that guarantees complete removal of all potentially identifying attributes, even if it significantly reduces the usefulness of the test data. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the data masking strategy, including an assessment of its effectiveness against re-identification risks, and implement enhancements if necessary, while also evaluating the impact on test data usability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data management, balancing the need for data privacy and compliance with the operational requirements of testing and development. The challenge lies in ensuring that sensitive customer data, even when masked or anonymized, does not inadvertently expose individuals or violate regulatory mandates. The risk assessment highlights a potential gap where the current masking process might not be robust enough to prevent re-identification, especially when combined with other available data. This requires a deep understanding of the data, the masking techniques, and the relevant regulatory landscape to make an informed decision. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough reevaluation of the data masking strategy, focusing on its effectiveness against potential re-identification risks. This aligns with the principles of data protection and privacy regulations, which mandate that organizations take appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. Specifically, it addresses the core concern raised by the risk assessment by ensuring that the masking process is not just a superficial alteration, but a robust mechanism that genuinely safeguards data confidentiality. This proactive stance demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to compliance, preventing potential breaches and associated penalties. It also supports the ethical obligation to protect customer information. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the current masking process without further investigation represents a failure to address an identified risk. This is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements that mandate risk mitigation. It suggests a disregard for the potential for data exposure and could lead to regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Implementing a more aggressive, but potentially less functional masking technique without understanding its impact on test data utility is also problematic. While it might address the re-identification risk, it could render the test data unusable, hindering development and testing efforts, which indirectly impacts business operations and potentially compliance with service-level agreements. This approach prioritizes one aspect of compliance over another without a balanced consideration. Relying solely on the assumption that anonymized data is inherently safe without independent verification is a significant ethical and regulatory lapse. Anonymization is a process, and its effectiveness can vary. Without validation, the organization cannot confidently assert compliance with data protection principles. This approach is reactive rather than proactive and relies on assumptions that may not hold true under scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a scenario should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, acknowledge and thoroughly understand the risk identified by the assessment. Second, consult the relevant regulatory framework. In this case, implied U.S. regulations governing data privacy and protection for distributed systems, to understand specific obligations regarding data masking and anonymization. Third, engage with technical experts to evaluate the current masking techniques and explore alternative or enhanced methods. Fourth, assess the impact of any proposed changes on both data security and the usability of test data. Finally, document the decision-making process, the chosen solution, and the rationale, ensuring it aligns with regulatory requirements and best practices for data governance. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that organizations are increasingly seeking to streamline their data processing workflows. When implementing process optimization strategies using IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems V7, 3, 1, which of the following approaches best aligns with the need to maintain data integrity and adhere to strict regulatory compliance frameworks? Option A. Implementing data masking and archiving techniques that are fully compliant with data privacy regulations and internal governance policies, ensuring that all optimization steps are documented and auditable. Option B. Focusing solely on performance enhancements without conducting thorough data integrity checks during the optimization process to expedite deployment. Option C. Automating the optimization process with minimal oversight, assuming that the software's default settings will inherently satisfy all regulatory requirements. Option D. Prioritizing the reduction of processing time and resource utilization by applying optimization algorithms that bypass standard data anonymization procedures. The correct answer is A. Implementing data masking and archiving techniques that are fully compliant with data privacy regulations and internal governance policies, ensuring that all optimization steps are documented and auditable. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in data management, where the need for efficient process optimization clashes with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with regulatory requirements. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire for speed and resource reduction with the absolute necessity of adhering to established data governance policies and legal frameworks. Misinterpreting or circumventing these requirements can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and a loss of stakeholder trust. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough understanding and application of the IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems V7. 3. One's process optimization capabilities within the defined regulatory landscape. This involves leveraging Optim's features for data masking, archiving, and test data management in a manner that is compliant with data privacy laws and internal governance policies. Best professional practice dictates that any optimization strategy must be validated against these requirements, ensuring that sensitive data remains protected and that audit trails are maintained. This proactive compliance ensures that the optimization efforts do not inadvertently create new risks or violate existing regulations. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately consider the regulatory implications of process optimization. One incorrect approach might involve implementing optimization techniques that bypass standard data anonymization or pseudonymization protocols, thereby exposing sensitive information. This directly violates data privacy regulations, which mandate the protection of personal and confidential data. Another incorrect approach could be to prioritize performance gains over data integrity checks during the optimization process, potentially leading to data corruption or loss. This failure to maintain data integrity is a breach of good data management practices and can have severe consequences if the compromised data is used for critical business decisions or regulatory reporting. A third incorrect approach might involve neglecting to document the optimization process and its impact on data, hindering auditability and compliance verification. This lack of transparency is a significant ethical and regulatory failing, as it prevents stakeholders from understanding how data has been processed and whether it meets compliance standards. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the specific regulatory framework governing their data. This involves consulting relevant legal counsel and compliance officers. Next, they must identify how IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems V7. 3. One's features can be applied to achieve process optimization goals without compromising regulatory compliance. This often involves a phased approach, with pilot testing and rigorous validation at each stage. A decision-making framework should prioritize compliance and data integrity, with optimization as a secondary, albeit important, objective. Any proposed optimization must be demonstrably compliant, and its impact on data governance clearly understood and documented. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates concerns regarding the potential for re-identification of sensitive data even after the application of anonymization techniques within IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems. Which approach best addresses these concerns while adhering to regulatory frameworks for data privacy? Option A. Accept the default anonymization settings provided by IBM InfoSphere Optim, assuming they are sufficient to meet regulatory compliance. Option B. Inform stakeholders that their concerns about residual risk are not technically feasible to eliminate entirely and proceed with the current anonymization plan without further investigation. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive data element analysis to identify sensitive attributes. Evaluate the effectiveness of proposed anonymization techniques against each attribute based on its re-identification risk and intended use, and document residual risks and mitigation plans. Option D. Implement the initial data masking and anonymization processes first, and then conduct a detailed risk assessment to identify any remaining vulnerabilities. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive data element analysis to identify sensitive attributes. Evaluate the effectiveness of proposed anonymization techniques against each attribute based on its re-identification risk and intended use, and document residual risks and mitigation plans. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practical constraints of a project timeline and resource availability. Stakeholders, while providing valuable feedback, may not fully grasp the technical complexities or regulatory implications of data masking and anonymization. The challenge lies in translating their concerns into actionable risk mitigation strategies that are both effective and feasible within the project scope. Careful judgment is required to prioritize risks, select appropriate anonymization techniques, and ensure compliance with relevant data privacy regulations without causing undue project delays. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and documented process for identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks associated with data masking and anonymization. This aligns with established risk management frameworks and regulatory expectations for data protection. By engaging with stakeholders to understand their concerns, evaluating the effectiveness of proposed anonymization techniques against specific data elements and their intended use, and documenting the residual risks, the team demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to compliance. This proactive and thorough approach minimizes the likelihood of data breaches, privacy violations, and reputational damage, thereby safeguarding sensitive information and maintaining stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach that involves solely relying on the vendor's default anonymization settings without independent validation fails to meet regulatory requirements for data protection. This oversight could lead to inadequate anonymization, leaving sensitive data exposed and violating privacy principles. Another incorrect approach, which is to postpone the detailed risk assessment until after the initial data masking implementation, is professionally unacceptable because it reverses the risk management process. Risks should be identified and mitigated before implementation to prevent potential harm. This reactive stance increases the likelihood of costly rework, data breaches, and noncompliance. Finally, an approach that dismisses stakeholder concerns about residual risk as overly cautious without a proper technical evaluation is a failure to acknowledge and address potential vulnerabilities. This can lead to regulatory scrutiny and a loss of confidence from those whose data is being protected. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This involves identifying all relevant data elements, potential threats, and regulatory obligations. Next, a thorough analysis of the effectiveness of proposed anonymization techniques should be conducted, considering factors such as data utility, re-identification risk, and the specific context of data usage. This analysis should be informed by both technical expertise and stakeholder input, documenting the identified risks, the mitigation strategies employed, and any residual risks is crucial for accountability and ongoing monitoring. Finally, regular review and updates to the risk assessment are necessary to adapt to changing data landscapes and regulatory requirements. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a streamlined data archiving process, which involves the automated deletion of historical customer interaction data older than 2 years without explicit legal hold review, could significantly reduce storage costs. However, this proposed process change has not been reviewed by the legal or compliance departments. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible approach to this proposed process optimization? Option A. Halt the implementation of the automated deletion process and initiate a formal review with legal and compliance teams to assess potential regulatory implications and data retention requirements before proceeding. Option B. Proceed with the automated deletion process immediately to realize the projected cost savings, as the data is no longer actively used for business operations. Option C. Rely on the existing data anonymization procedures that were in place when the data was initially collected, assuming they are still adequate for current regulatory standards. Option D. Implement the automated deletion process, but ensure that all customer data is anonymized before deletion to mitigate privacy concerns. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the automated deletion process immediately to realize the projected cost savings, as the data is no longer actively used for business operations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in data management, where the perceived immediate cost savings of a process optimization initiative might overshadow the long-term regulatory compliance and data integrity risks. The professional challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency with the imperative to adhere to data governance principles and potential regulatory mandates related to data retention, privacy, and auditability. Careful judgment is required to ensure that optimization efforts do not inadvertently compromise the organization's ability to meet its legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic view of process optimization, integrating regulatory considerations from the outset. By involving compliance and legal teams, the organization ensures that any proposed changes are vetted against relevant data protection laws and industry-specific regulations. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of future penalties, reputational damage, and the cost of remediation. It aligns with the principle of privacy by design and demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship, which is increasingly a regulatory expectation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to violations of data privacy laws, such as those requiring specific data handling procedures or consent mechanisms, resulting in significant fines and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach that bypasses internal review processes for speed is ethically flawed, as it undermines established governance frameworks designed to protect sensitive data and ensure compliance. This can lead to inconsistent data application and potential breaches of confidentiality or integrity, which are often subject to regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach that assumes existing data anonymization is sufficient without reevaluation risks noncompliance with evolving privacy standards, as anonymization techniques may become outdated or insufficient to prevent re-identification under new legal interpretations or technological advancements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should identify all potential stakeholders, including IT, legal, compliance, and business units. It should then systematically evaluate the proposed optimization against known regulatory requirements and ethical guidelines. A key step is to conduct a thorough impact assessment, considering how changes might affect data privacy, security, retention, and auditability. Finally, decisions should be documented, with clear justifications that demonstrate due diligence and adherence to both business objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 9. The control framework reveals a scenario where a financial services organization seeking to optimize its data archiving processes using IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems to reduce storage costs and improve query performance on active data. The primary concern is to ensure that the archived data remains legally discoverable and compliant with financial industry regulations regarding data retention and auditability. Which of the following approaches best balances cost reduction and performance enhancement with these critical compliance requirements? Option A. Implement a strategy that prioritizes the aggressive deduplication and compression of all archived data, regardless of its original format or metadata, to maximize storage savings. Option B. Adopt a phased optimization approach that involves analyzing data usage patterns, defining clear retention policies, and utilizing Optim's built-in archiving and retrieval functionalities with robust auditing enabled, followed by rigorous testing in a non-production environment before full deployment. Option C. Focus solely on migrating older data to less expensive, cloud-based storage solutions without verifying Optim's compatibility or the integrity of the data during the migration process. Option D. Develop and deploy a custom scripting solution to directly manipulate archived data files, bypassing Optim's standard archiving and retrieval mechanisms to achieve faster access. The correct answer is A. Implement a strategy that prioritizes the aggressive deduplication and compression of all archived data, regardless of its original format or metadata, to maximize storage savings. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge in process optimization, balancing the need for efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain data integrity and compliance. In the context of IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems, this often involves managing sensitive data, ensuring its accuracy, and adhering to regulatory requirements for data handling and retention. The professional challenge lies in selecting optimization strategies that do not inadvertently compromise these critical aspects. The correct approach prioritizes a phased, risk-aware implementation of process optimization. This involves thorough analysis of existing processes, identification of bottlenecks, and the development of targeted solutions that are rigorously tested in a controlled environment before full deployment. This methodology ensures that data integrity is maintained, compliance with relevant regulations, such as those governing data privacy and financial reporting, depending on the specific industry and jurisdiction, is upheld, and the optimization benefits are realized without introducing new risks. This represents best professional practice because it aligns with principles of due diligence, risk management, and regulatory adherence, which are paramount in data management and system optimization. An incorrect approach might involve implementing broad, untested changes without adequate impact assessment. For instance, a strategy that focuses solely on speed of execution, without considering the potential for data corruption or the introduction of unauthorized data transformations, would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory violations if the data is subject to specific compliance mandates, such as those requiring auditable data trails or specific data quality standards. Another incorrect approach might be to bypass established testing protocols in an effort to achieve rapid results. This failure to validate changes before production deployment poses a significant risk to data integrity and system stability, potentially leading to data loss, inaccurate reporting, and non-compliance with data governance policies. Such actions demonstrate a disregard for established best practices in system management and a failure to uphold professional responsibility towards data stewardship. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the business objectives and regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, assessing potential risks and benefits of each optimization strategy, and prioritizing approaches that demonstrably uphold data integrity and compliance. Rigorous testing, validation, and phased deployment are essential components of this process. Continuous monitoring and evaluation post-implementation are also critical to ensure ongoing adherence to optimized processes and regulatory requirements. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates that the current data masking strategy for the testing environment, which involves replacing specific fields like customer names and addresses with generic placeholders, is insufficient for meeting the stringent data privacy requirement of the C2090-552 IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems v7. 3. 1. Regulatory framework. The testing team requires realistic data for comprehensive regression testing, but the compliance department is concerned about potential re-identification risks. Which of the following approaches best addresses this implementation challenge while adhering to regulatory mandates? Option A. Implement advanced data masking techniques that include referential integrity preservation and data transformation, coupled with strict role-based access controls and comprehensive audit logging for the test environment. Option B. Create a subset of production data and perform manual anonymization of all potentially identifying fields before loading it into the test environment. Option C. Utilize a direct copy of production data for testing and implement a post-load masking process that is executed only once before the testing cycle begins. Option D. Rely on the existing basic data masking of names and addresses, and provide additional training to the testing team on the importance of not sharing or extracting data from the test environment. The correct answer is A. Implement advanced data masking techniques that include referential integrity preservation and data transformation, coupled with strict role-based access controls and comprehensive audit logging for the test environment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge when dealing with sensitive data and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for data utility and testing with the stringent requirements for data protection and privacy mandated by relevant regulations. Professionals must navigate the complexities of data masking, anonymization, and access control to ensure that test environments do not inadvertently expose or compromise production data, which could lead to significant legal, financial, and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a robust, multi-layered strategy that prioritizes data security and compliance throughout the testing lifecycle. This includes implementing strong data masking techniques that go beyond simple substitution, ensuring that sensitive data elements are rendered unusable for identification, while preserving data structure and referential integrity for testing purposes. Furthermore, strict access controls and audit trails for the test environment are crucial to demonstrate compliance and prevent unauthorized access. This approach aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that only necessary data is used for testing and that its use is strictly controlled, thereby upholding regulatory obligations. An incorrect approach that relies solely on basic data masking, such as replacing names with generic placeholders without considering other identifying attributes, fails to adequately protect sensitive information. This could lead to re-identification risks, violating regulations that mandate the protection of personally identifiable information, PI. Another incorrect approach that neglects to implement granular access controls for the test environment creates a significant security vulnerability. If unauthorized personnel can access or extract masked production data from the test environment, it constitutes a data breach and a direct violation of data protection laws. A third incorrect approach that involves using a direct copy of production data, even with the intention of masking it later, is inherently risky. The window of exposure before masking is complete is a critical vulnerability, and the mere presence of unmasked sensitive data in a less controlled environment can be a regulatory violation. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying sensitive data elements, understanding the regulatory requirements applicable to that data, assessing the risks associated with different data handling approaches for testing, and selecting solutions that demonstrably mitigate those risks while enabling effective testing. Continuous monitoring and auditing of the test environment are also essential components of this framework to ensure ongoing compliance and security. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that a financial services organization is preparing to deploy a new version of its core banking application. To ensure thorough testing, the IT department proposes using a recent copy of the production database. However, this database contains sensitive customer financial information, which approach best balances the need for comprehensive testing with the absolute priority of adhering to data privacy regulations for the exam's jurisdiction. Option A. Rely on general data privacy awareness among the testing team without implementing specific technical controls to protect the sensitive customer information in the test database. Option B. Proceed with testing using the production data copy directly, assuming that the testing environment is sufficiently secured and that the risk of exposure is minimal. Option C. Utilize IBM InfoSphere Optim's data masking and anonymization capabilities to transform the production data copy into a secure, non-production dataset before it is used for testing. Option D. Request a waiver from the relevant regulatory body to use production data for testing, citing the critical nature of the application deployment. The correct answer is C. Utilize IBM InfoSphere Optim's data masking and anonymization capabilities to transform the production data copy into a secure, non-production dataset before it is used for testing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between data privacy regulations and the business need for comprehensive data analysis and testing. The core difficulty lies in balancing the protection of sensitive customer information with the operational requirements of software development and maintenance, particularly when using production data for non-production purposes. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with IBM InfoSphere Optim's capabilities, while adhering to the stringent data protection laws applicable to the exam's jurisdiction. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory mandate of data anonymization and masking before data is used in non-production environments. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that sensitive personal data is not exposed unnecessarily. By employing Optim's robust masking and anonymization features, the organization upholds its legal and ethical obligations to protect customer privacy, thereby mitigating the risk of data breaches and associated penalties. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling, which is a cornerstone of professional conduct in regulated industries. An incorrect approach that involves using production data directly for testing without adequate anonymization or masking would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate data protection laws by exposing personally identifiable information, PI, in an uncontrolled environment, increasing the risk of unauthorized access and misuse. Such an action could lead to severe legal repercussions, including substantial fines, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on a general understanding of data privacy without implementing specific technical controls provided by Optim, would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to leverage available tools to meet regulatory requirements, leaving the organization vulnerable to noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. This framework should involve 1. Thoroughly understanding the applicable data protection regulations. 2. Assessing the specific data types and their sensitivity within the production environment. 3. evaluating the capabilities of tools like IBM InfoSphere Optim to meet these requirements through anonymization, masking, and data subsetting. 4. Developing and implementing a clear policy for data usage in non-production environments with robust technical controls. 5. Regularly reviewing and auditing the effectiveness of these controls to ensure ongoing compliance. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are met without compromising data privacy or regulatory adherence. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that a financial services organization is implementing an IBM InfoSphere Optim solution for archiving customer transaction data. The primary objective is to reduce the size of their active production databases, while ensuring that historical data remains accessible for regulatory audits and potential customer inquiries, all within the strict confines of U.S. financial data privacy regulations. The organization is considering different strategies for handling personally identifiable information, PI, within the archived datasets. Which of the following approaches best aligns with U.S. financial data privacy regulations and professional best practices for data archiving? Option A. Archive customer transaction data with all PII completely removed, rendering it unrecoverable, and rely solely on metadata for any audit trail requirements. Option B. Archive customer transaction data in its original, unmasked, and unencrypted format, with the assumption that access will be limited to a few trusted IT personnel. Option C. Archive customer transaction data with PII masked using reversible masking techniques, and implement strict role-based access controls and comprehensive audit logging for all access to the archived data. Option D. Archive customer transaction data with PII pseudonymized using a one-way hashing algorithm, making it impossible to link back to the original customer without a separate, unsecured lookup table. The correct answer is C. Archive customer transaction data with PII masked using reversible masking techniques, and implement strict role-based access controls and comprehensive audit logging for all access to the archived data. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical need to balance data privacy regulations with the operational requirements of data archiving and retrieval. In the context of IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems v7. 3. 1. Particularly within a U.S. regulatory framework, this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of personal data and the legal obligations surrounding its management. Organizations must ensure that their data archiving strategies comply with regulations such as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, if health information is involved, or the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, for financial data, among others. The core challenge lies in anonymizing or pseudonymizing data effectively during the archiving process to prevent unauthorized access or re-identification, while still allowing for legitimate, controlled access for business or compliance purposes. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and data protection as foundational elements of any data management strategy. By implementing robust anonymization techniques that render data non-personally identifiable, and by establishing strict access controls and audit trails for any retrieved archived data, an organization adheres to the spirit and letter of U.S. data privacy laws. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of data breaches, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship, which is paramount in today's data-driven environment. An incorrect approach that involves archiving data in its original, identifiable form without adequate security measures or anonymization fails to meet regulatory requirements. This could lead to violations of privacy laws, resulting in significant fines and legal repercussions. Archiving data with the intent to deal with privacy later is a critical ethical and regulatory failure, as it creates an immediate risk of exposure. Another incorrect approach, such as over-anonymizing data to the point where it loses its business value or auditability, also presents a professional failure. While aiming for privacy, this approach neglects the legitimate business need for accessible and usable archived data, potentially hindering operational efficiency and compliance reporting. It demonstrates a misunderstanding of the balance required between data protection and data utility. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of applicable U.S. data privacy regulations, relevant to the specific data being managed. This involves identifying the types of data, the potential risks associated with their exposure, and the legal requirements for their protection. Subsequently, they should evaluate data archiving solutions and strategies based on their ability to meet these regulatory mandates, focusing on features like robust anonymization, pseudonymization, encryption, and granular access control. A risk-based approach, where the level of protection is commensurate with the sensitivity of the data, is essential. Regular review and auditing of archiving processes and data access logs are also critical components of this framework to ensure ongoing compliance and security. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that a proposed data archiving strategy designed to reduce storage costs was developed by a team that includes a close relative of a senior executive who stands to benefit from the cost savings. The study's findings are compelling, but the personal connection raises concerns about potential bias in the recommendations. What is the most ethically sound course of action for the data professional who identified this potential conflict? Option A. Proceed with the implementation of the archiving strategy as planned, assuming the recommendations are technically sound and the personal relationship is irrelevant to the data's integrity. Option B. Discreetly inform the senior executive about the potential conflict and suggest they review the study independently to ensure objectivity. Option C. Recommend a modified archiving strategy that is less aggressive, thereby mitigating the perceived benefit to the relative while still achieving some cost savings. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the relevant oversight committee and recuse oneself from any further involvement in the evaluation or implementation of the archiving strategy. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the relevant oversight committee and recuse oneself from any further involvement in the evaluation or implementation of the archiving strategy. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest that requires careful ethical consideration. The challenge lies in balancing the organization's pursuit of efficiency with the professional obligation to maintain data integrity and avoid situations that could be perceived as biased or compromising. The study's findings, if acted upon without proper disclosure and oversight, could lead to the appearance of favoritism or the manipulation of data for personal gain, undermining trust in the data management processes. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate oversight body or management. This upholds the principle of integrity, a cornerstone of professional conduct in data management. By proactively reporting the situation, the professional demonstrates a commitment to ethical standards and allows for an objective assessment and management of the conflict. This ensures that decisions regarding the efficiency study's findings are made impartially, safeguarding the reputation of both the individual and the organization. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with implementing the efficiency recommendations without disclosing the personal relationship. This failure to disclose constitutes a breach of ethical duty and potentially violates guidelines related to conflicts of interest, which often mandate transparency. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the findings altogether, as this neglects the professional responsibility to identify and address potential improvements, even if they arise from a situation with a perceived conflict. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly influence the interpretation of the findings to benefit the relative, which is a direct violation of professional integrity and could lead to data manipulation. Professionals facing such dilemmas should follow a structured decision-making process. First, identify the potential conflict and its implications. Second, consult relevant organizational policies and professional codes of conduct. Third, disclose the conflict to the appropriate authority. Fourth, recuse oneself from any decision-making processes directly related to the conflict. Finally, cooperate fully with any review or investigation to ensure a fair and ethical resolution. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that development teams frequently require access to realistic data for testing IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems functionalities. Considering the strict regulatory framework governing data privacy and protection, which of the following strategies best balances the need for effective testing with the imperative to safeguard sensitive information? Option A. Sharing production data with external development partners under strict confidentiality agreements, without any data transformation. Option B. Utilizing production data directly in non-production environments to ensure the highest fidelity for testing purposes. Option C. Developing custom scripts to randomly generate entirely new data that mimics the structure of production data, without any reference to actual records. Option D. Implementing comprehensive data masking and subsetting techniques using IBM InfoSphere Optim to create anonymized and representative test datasets. The correct answer is D. Implementing comprehensive data masking and subsetting techniques using IBM InfoSphere Optim to create anonymized and representative test datasets. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in data management projects. Balancing the need for data privacy and compliance with the practical requirements of testing and development, organizations often struggle to provide realistic test data without exposing sensitive information. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing a method that effectively anonymizes or masks data while preserving its structural integrity and utility for testing purposes, all within the bounds of applicable regulations. The correct approach involves leveraging IBM InfoSphere Optim's capabilities for data masking and subsetting. This method directly addresses the regulatory requirement to protect sensitive data by creating non-production datasets that are functionally equivalent for testing, but do not contain actual personal or confidential information. This aligns with best practices for data privacy and security, ensuring that the organization remains compliant with data protection laws by minimizing the risk of data breaches or unauthorized access during development and testing phases. An incorrect approach would be to use production data directly in non-production environments without any form of masking or anonymization. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It directly violates data protection principles, such as data minimization and purpose limitation, and exposes the organization to severe penalties under data privacy regulations for unauthorized processing of sensitive data. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a superficial masking technique that does not adequately obscure the original data, leaving it vulnerable to re-identification. This also constitutes a regulatory failure, as it does not meet the standard of robust data protection required by law, potentially leading to breaches of confidentiality and trust. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the specific data privacy regulations applicable to their jurisdiction and the types of data being handled. Then, they should evaluate the capabilities of their data management tools, such as IBM InfoSphere Optim, to meet these requirements. A structured decision-making process would involve identifying sensitive data elements, defining masking rules based on regulatory requirements and testing needs, selecting appropriate masking techniques, e.g., substitution, shuffling, encryption, testing the effectiveness of the masking process, and establishing clear policies for the use of masked data in non-production environments. This systematic approach ensures both compliance and the integrity of the testing process. Question 15. Assessment of the most appropriate method for generating realistic test data for an upcoming system upgrade when the production environment contains sensitive personally identifiable information, PI, adhering strictly to data privacy regulations. Option A. Copy a representative subset of production data directly into the test environment, ensuring only authorized personnel have access. Option B. Manually remove or blank out all fields identified as containing PII from a copy of the production data before loading it into the test environment. Option C. Source and utilize publicly available, anonymized datasets that are known to be free of any sensitive information for testing purposes. Option D. Utilize IBM InfoSphere Optim to create masked or synthetic test data that mimics the structure and characteristics of production data without exposing actual PII. The correct answer is D. Utilize IBM InfoSphere Optim to create masked or synthetic test data that mimics the structure and characteristics of production data without exposing actual PII. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data management, balancing the need for data privacy and compliance with the operational requirements of system testing. The professional is tasked with providing test data that mimics production data for a critical system upgrade. However, the production data contains sensitive personally identifiable information, PI, that is protected under relevant data privacy regulations. The challenge lies in creating realistic test data without exposing actual PII, which could lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The pressure to deliver functional test data quickly can tempt shortcuts that compromise compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves using IBM InfoSphere Optim's data masking capabilities to create synthetic or anonymized test data. Optim is designed to facilitate this by allowing users to define masking rules that replace sensitive data with realistic but fictitious values. This ensures that the test environment has data that accurately reflects the structure, format, and referential integrity of production data, enabling thorough testing of the system upgrade. Crucially, this method adheres to data privacy regulations by ensuring that no actual PII is present in the test environment. This aligns with the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, as the test data is generated for a specific, legitimate purpose, testing, without compromising the privacy of individuals whose data resides in production. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to directly copy a subset of production data into the test environment without any modification. This is a direct violation of data privacy regulations, as it exposes PII to individuals who do not have a legitimate business need to access it in a testing context. This failure to protect sensitive data can result in significant fines and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to manually redact or delete sensitive fields from the production data before copying it to the test environment. While this attempts to remove PII, it often results in data that is not representative of production, leading to incomplete or inaccurate testing. Furthermore, manual redaction is prone to errors, and it's possible that some sensitive data might be inadvertently overlooked, still leading to a compliance breach. This approach also fails to leverage the advanced capabilities of tools like Optim, which are specifically designed for secure and effective test data generation. A third incorrect approach would be to use publicly available, non-production datasets for testing. While these datasets are safe from a privacy perspective, they are unlikely to accurately reflect the complexity, volume, and specific characteristics of the organization's production data. This can lead to a false sense of security during testing, as issues that would arise with real-world data might go undetected, potentially causing significant problems once the system is deployed to production. This approach fails to meet the requirement of realistic testing and therefore does not adequately prepare for the system upgrade. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing compliance and data security. When faced with the need for test data derived from production, the first step is to identify sensitive data elements. Subsequently, leverage the capabilities of tools like IBM InfoSphere Optim to implement robust data masking or generation techniques. This ensures that test data is both realistic and compliant. Regular training on data privacy regulations and the proper use of data management tools is essential. In situations of uncertainty, consulting with legal and compliance departments is a critical step in the decision-making process. Question 16. Comparative studies suggest that the effectiveness of testing IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems is significantly influenced by the nature of the data used. When preparing test data derived from production environments, which of the following approaches best balances the need for realistic testing scenarios with the imperative to comply with data privacy regulations and protect sensitive information? Option A. Utilize a direct copy of production data for testing purposes, with a plan to delete the test data immediately after the testing cycle is complete. Option B. Apply superficial masking techniques, such as replacing names with generic placeholders, without thoroughly assessing the potential for re-identification through other data elements. Option C. Implement robust anonymization techniques that irreversibly remove or transform personally identifiable information, PI, while preserving the statistical characteristics and relationships within the data, enabling realistic testing of Optim's masking and archiving capabilities. Option D. Generate entirely synthetic test data that bears no resemblance to the structure or characteristics of the production data, prioritizing absolute data privacy over testing realism. The correct answer is C. Implement robust anonymization techniques that irreversibly remove or transform personally identifiable information, PI, while preserving the statistical characteristics and relationships within the data, enabling realistic testing of Optim's masking and archiving capabilities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data management and compliance with data privacy regulations. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate level of data masking or anonymization when creating test data, ensuring it is sufficiently realistic for testing IBM InfoSphere Optim functionalities while strictly adhering to data protection laws. The professional must navigate the potential for accidental data exposure or the creation of test data that is too abstract to be effective. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and data security by implementing robust anonymization techniques that remove or obscure personally identifiable information, PI, while retaining data characteristics. It ensures that sensitive data is protected in accordance with relevant data privacy laws. This approach allows for effective testing of Optim's capabilities in data masking, archiving, and retention without compromising the integrity of production data or violating legal obligations. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach that involves using a direct copy of production data for testing, even with the intention of deleting it later, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates data protection principles by exposing sensitive PII to a less controlled testing environment. It increases the risk of data breaches, unauthorized access, and noncompliance with regulations that mandate data minimization and secure processing. Furthermore, it fails to uphold the ethical responsibility to protect customer or employee data. Another incorrect approach, which involves applying superficial masking techniques that do not adequately obscure PII, e.g., simply replacing names with generic placeholders without addressing other identifiers, also leads to regulatory and ethical failures. This approach creates a false sense of security while still leaving the data vulnerable to re-identification, especially when combined with other data points. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the requirements of data protection laws and the potential for sophisticated de-anonymization techniques. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on creating synthetic data that is entirely fabricated and bears no resemblance to production data characteristics, is also professionally unsound. While it offers the highest level of data privacy, it fails to meet the practical testing needs of IBM InfoSphere Optim. Optim's effectiveness is often measured by its ability to manage, mask, and archive real data patterns. Synthetic data that lacks these characteristics will not provide a realistic environment to validate Optim's performance, accuracy, or the effectiveness of masking rules applied to production-like data. This leads to ineffective testing and a potential failure to identify critical issues before deployment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the data being handled, the specific requirements of the IBM InfoSphere Optim functionalities being tested, and the applicable data protection regulations. This includes conducting a detailed impact assessment to identify PII, evaluating different anonymization and masking techniques, and selecting the most appropriate method that balances testing efficacy with regulatory compliance and data security. Collaboration with legal and compliance teams is crucial to ensure that all regulatory obligations are met. Question 17. Governance review demonstrates that the organization's current data management strategy for customer transaction data is leading to escalating storage costs and potential compliance risks due to the indefinite retention of all historical records in an active, high-performance database. The review highlights the need to align with regulatory requirements for data retention and disposal, while ensuring that authorized analytical teams can still access relevant historical data for trend analysis and reporting. Which of the following approaches best addresses these conflicting requirements? Option A. Immediately delete all transaction data older than 1 year to reduce storage costs, without establishing specific retention policies or considering analytical access needs. Option B. Migrate all historical transaction data to a low-cost, offline archival system that requires a multi-day retrieval process for any data access requests. Option C. Continue to store all customer transaction data in the active, high-performance database indefinitely, despite the rising costs and potential compliance issues. Option D. Implement a tiered data storage strategy that archives historical transaction data to a cost-effective, compliant storage solution based on defined retention periods, while maintaining current and recent data in the active database for immediate analytical access. The correct answer is D. Implement a tiered data storage strategy that archives historical transaction data to a cost-effective, compliant storage solution based on defined retention periods, while maintaining current and recent data in the active database for immediate analytical access. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in data management, where the need for efficient data access for analytics conflicts with regulatory requirements for data retention and privacy. The professional challenge lies in balancing these competing demands without compromising compliance or operational effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to select a data management strategy that is both technically sound and legally defensible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory mandate for data retention, while also enabling efficient access for authorized analytical purposes. By implementing a tiered storage strategy that archives historical data according to defined retention policies, the organization ensures compliance with relevant data protection and record-keeping regulations. Simultaneously, maintaining readily accessible current and recent data for analytics minimizes disruption to business operations and maximizes the value derived from that data. This approach demonstrates a proactive and compliant data lifecycle management strategy. An incorrect approach that relies solely on deleting data after a short period, without regard for retention policies, would fail to meet regulatory requirements for data preservation. This could lead to significant penalties and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which involves retaining all data indefinitely in an easily accessible format, would be inefficient, costly, and potentially expose sensitive information beyond its necessary life cycle, increasing the risk of data breaches and violating privacy principles. Third incorrect approach, which involves moving all data to a low-cost archive without any mechanism for timely retrieval for analytics, would hinder business operations and prevent the organization from deriving timely insights, potentially impacting competitive advantage and operational efficiency, and indirectly failing to meet the spirit of data utilization for business purposes. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the applicable regulatory framework, including data retention mandates, privacy laws, and any industry-specific guidelines. This understanding should then be mapped against the organization's business objectives and data usage patterns. A risk-based assessment should be conducted to identify potential compliance gaps and operational inefficiencies. The decision-making process should involve collaboration between data governance, legal, compliance, and IT teams to develop a comprehensive data management strategy that prioritizes compliance, security, and business value. Regular reviews and updates to the strategy are essential to adapt to evolving regulations and business needs. Question 18. To address the challenge of ensuring data privacy and regulatory compliance when preparing production data for testing environments using IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems, which stakeholder perspective should be prioritized to guide the selection and implementation of data masking strategies? Option A. The perspective of the IT operations team, emphasizing the performance impact and resource utilization of the data masking processes. Option B. The perspective of the compliance and legal departments, ensuring that all data masking techniques strictly adhere to relevant data protection regulations and internal policies. Option C. The perspective of the end users, prioritizing the preservation of data usability and the avoidance of any masking that might hinder their ability to perform realistic testing scenarios. Option D. The perspective of the development team, focusing on the ease of data access and the ability to replicate production data characteristics for accurate testing. The correct answer is D. The perspective of the development team, focusing on the ease of data access and the ability to replicate production data characteristics for accurate testing. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between business objectives and the regulatory imperative to protect sensitive customer data. The stakeholder perspective is critical here, as different groups will have varying priorities and understandings of data privacy requirements. The challenge lies in balancing the need for data access for testing and development with the strict mandates of data protection regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data manipulation or masking strategy is not only effective for its intended purpose, but also fully compliant with the applicable regulatory framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory requirements before implementing any data masking solution. This proactive stance ensures that the chosen masking techniques are legally sound and ethically responsible. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that only necessary data elements are masked or anonymized, and that the masking is performed in a way that prevents re-identification of individuals, thereby adhering to data protection laws. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to regulatory compliance, which is paramount in handling sensitive information. An incorrect approach that involves applying a generic, one-size-fits-all masking technique without a detailed review of the specific data elements and their sensitivity levels is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a regulatory failure because it risks inadequate protection of personally identifiable information, PI, potentially violating data privacy laws by exposing sensitive data or by masking data in a way that is not robust enough to prevent re-identification. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of care and responsibility in handling confidential information. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with masking based solely on the perceived needs of the development team without consulting with legal or compliance departments, is also professionally unacceptable. This represents a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses essential oversight and validation processes designed to ensure compliance with data protection regulations. It is ethically questionable, as it prioritizes expediency over the legal and ethical obligations to protect customer data. A third incorrect approach, which is to assume that anonymization is sufficient without understanding the specific anonymization techniques and their effectiveness against potential re-identification attacks, is professionally unacceptable. This is a regulatory failure because many data protection laws require robust anonymization or pseudonymization that prevents re-identification. Relying on a superficial understanding of anonymization can lead to non-compliance and data breaches. Ethically, it is a failure to exercise due diligence in safeguarding sensitive information. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify all applicable regulatory requirements related to data privacy and protection. Second, understand the specific data elements involved and their sensitivity classifications. Third, evaluate potential data masking or anonymization techniques against these requirements, considering their effectiveness, reversibility, and impact on data utility. Fourth, consult with legal and compliance experts to validate the chosen approach. Finally, document the entire process, including the rationale for the chosen masking strategy and the steps taken to ensure regulatory compliance. Question 19. Process analysis reveals that a financial services firm is implementing IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems to manage sensitive customer data, including data archiving and test data generation. The firm needs to conduct a risk assessment for this implementation. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements for data handling and risk management in the financial sector? Option A. Focus the risk assessment primarily on the technical security features of Optim, such as encryption and access controls, assuming that these technical measures inherently satisfy all regulatory data protection requirements. Option B. Defer the detailed risk assessment of Optim's impact on data compliance until after the system has been fully deployed and is in production to gather real-world usage data for a more practical assessment. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that maps Optim's functionalities to specific regulatory obligations, e.g., SEC's Regulation SB, FINRA record-keeping rules, identifies potential data privacy and integrity risks, and includes validation of controls for sensitive data protection and auditability. Option D. Prioritize the assessment of Optim's performance enhancement capabilities and ease of integration with existing systems, with regulatory compliance being a secondary consideration addressed only if specific issues arise during implementation. Correct answer is D. Prioritize the assessment of Optim's performance enhancement capabilities and ease of integration with existing systems, with regulatory compliance being a secondary consideration addressed only if specific issues arise during implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in managing data risk within a financial institution, specifically concerning the use of IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems. The challenge lies in balancing the need for effective data risk assessment with the imperative to comply with stringent regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, for financial data handling and retention. The organization must ensure that its risk assessment process accurately identifies potential vulnerabilities in data privacy, integrity, and availability, while also adhering to specific audit trails and data lineage requirements. The complexity arises from the distributed nature of the data and the potential for Optim to interact with various data sources, increasing the attack surface and the difficulty in maintaining comprehensive oversight. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, risk-based methodology that integrates regulatory compliance directly into the data risk assessment framework. This means identifying all relevant data assets, understanding their sensitivity and criticality, and then mapping these to specific regulatory obligations. For instance, FINRA Rule 4511 mandates record-keeping, and the SEC's Regulation SB governs the protection of customer information. A robust risk assessment would therefore prioritize risks that could lead to non-compliance with these rules, such as inadequate data masking for sensitive customer information or insufficient audit logging for data modifications. The use of Optim's capabilities for data masking, archiving, and test data management must be evaluated against these regulatory requirements to ensure that the tools themselves do not introduce new risks or exacerbate existing ones. This approach ensures that risk mitigation efforts are aligned with legal and ethical obligations, providing a defensible position in the event of an audit or incident. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on the technical capabilities of IBM InfoSphere Optim without considering the regulatory landscape is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. For example, implementing data masking features purely for performance optimization without assessing if the masking techniques adequately protect sensitive data according to SEC Regulation SB would be a failure. This overlooks the primary purpose of data protection regulations, which is safeguarding customer privacy and preventing unauthorized access or disclosure. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a risk assessment that is purely theoretical and does not involve practical testing or validation of Optim's controls against actual data scenarios. This would fail to identify real-world vulnerabilities and could lead to a false sense of security, potentially violating FINRA requirements for accurate and complete record-keeping. A risk assessment must be grounded in the operational reality of how Optim is used and how it interacts with sensitive data. Finally, a risk assessment that prioritizes cost reduction over regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, choosing a less secure but cheaper data archiving strategy within Optim to save money, without ensuring it meets SEC or FINRA retention and auditability requirements, would expose the firm to substantial legal and financial penalties. This demonstrates a disregard for fiduciary duty and ethical conduct in financial data management. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with data risk assessment in regulated industries must adopt a proactive and compliance-centric mindset. The decision-making process should begin with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations, e.g., SEC FINRA. This understanding should then inform the identification of critical data assets and potential threats. When evaluating tools like IBM InfoSphere Optim, the assessment must focus on how the tool's features can be leveraged to meet regulatory obligations and mitigate identified risks. This involves a continuous cycle of identification, assessment, mitigation, and monitoring, with regulatory compliance as a constant benchmark. Professionals should always ask, does this approach ensure we meet our legal and ethical obligations regarding data protection and record-keeping? Question 20. The performance metrics show a significant slowdown in data retrieval for a critical business report, impacting user productivity. A proposed solution involves temporarily disabling certain data masking rules within IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems v7. 3. 1. To expedite access. Considering the regulatory framework for this exam, which of the following actions best addresses this situation? Option A. Bypass the standard change management process and directly modify the data masking rules to improve performance, as the urgency of the report outweighs procedural requirements. Option B. Immediately disable all data masking rules to ensure maximum performance gains and inform users that data access will be faster, with a plan to re-enable them once the report is generated. Option C. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of disabling data masking rules, focusing on potential data exposure and compliance risks, and explore alternative performance optimization techniques within the Optim framework before considering any temporary rule modifications. Option D. Implement the proposed solution to disable data masking rules, as the performance improvement is critical for business operations, and document the change for retrospective review. The correct answer is D. Implement the proposed solution to disable data masking rules, as the performance improvement is critical for business operations, and document the change for retrospective review. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for data access with long-term data governance and compliance obligations. The performance metrics, while indicating a potential bottleneck, do not override the established regulatory framework governing data handling. The challenge lies in identifying a solution that addresses the performance issue without compromising the integrity, security, or privacy of the data, which are paramount under the specified regulatory framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the IBM InfoSphere Optim for distributed systems v7. 3. 1. Regulatory framework. This framework emphasizes controlled data access and management by proposing a phased approach that includes impact assessment, testing, and documentation. It ensures that any changes are made in a compliant and responsible manner. This aligns with the principles of data stewardship and risk management inherent in the regulatory guidelines, ensuring that data remains secure, accurate, and accessible only to authorized personnel for legitimate business purposes. An incorrect approach that suggests immediate, unrestricted access to all data to alleviate performance issues would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate principles of data security and privacy, potentially exposing sensitive information and leading to non-compliance with data protection regulations. Another incorrect approach, such as disabling audit trails to speed up data retrieval, would directly contravene the requirement for accountability and traceability of data access and modifications, a core tenet of most data governance frameworks. Finally, bypassing established change control procedures to implement a quick fix would undermine the integrity of the system and introduce unforeseen risks, failing to meet the due diligence expected under regulatory oversight. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements. When faced with performance issues, the first step is to analyze the root cause within the context of these regulations. Solutions should then be evaluated based on their compliance with data security, privacy, and governance policies. A risk-based approach, involving impact assessments and phased implementation with proper testing and documentation, is crucial. Escalation to relevant stakeholders, including legal and compliance teams, should occur when potential conflicts between operational needs and regulatory mandates arise.